Arek, teraz widać 200.
During the base leg, the crew of the Yakolev 40 contacted the Tupolev 154 crew and informed them that according to their estimations, the current visibility was 200 metres. Despite a further warning from the Yakolev 40 crew, the Tupolev 154 crew continued approach. The crew of the Tupolev 154 requested clearance for the final turn. The clearance was given by the landing zone controller. The phrase of the navigator pronounced at this moment, "He'll go crazy," confirms that the pilot in command and the crew were in a difficult position psychologically. Obviously, in case they failed to approach and had to go to an alternative aerodrome, the pilot in command would face negative reaction from the main passenger. The following instruments are shown from the left to the right. In the upper row there are the instrument speed indicator, the vertical speed indicator and the radio altimeter. In the lower row are the control wheel, the main electronic altimeter and the electromechanical altimeter. Shown on the screen is a graphical picture of the landing radar screen during the accident flight. This picture was created based on the findings of the test fly-around of the aerodrome ground navigation aids and conducted calculations that were provided to the Polish side. As was shown, the actual glide path line on the radar screen was depicted with an angle of 3 degrees 10 minutes, instead of the nominal glide path of 2 degrees 40 minutes. The 3D position of which, in space, is shown in green. Thus, the actual position of the aircraft was higher than the controller saw on the screen in reference to the glide path line. The inaccuracy in the glide path position indication does not lead to early descent. If the aircraft follows a steeper glide path, the target vertical speed increases by 1 metre per second, while the middle marker should be passed 10 metres higher than the established altitude of 70 metres. This fragment shows also that when reaching the glide path there was a person in the cockpit other than the crew, identified by Polish experts as the Commander-in-Chief of the Polish Air Forces. The content of his phrase, "explanation of the high-lift device's functions," assumes that at that time there were at least 2 persons in the cockpit other than the crew members. According to the conclusion of Polish and Russian expert psychologists, the indifference of the Commander-in-Chief of the Polish Air Forces, who was aware of the pertinent information, to the emerging hazardous situation, affected the piloting command's decision to continue approach and further descend lower than the established minimum descent altitude of 100 meters without establishing visual contact with the ground references. The aircraft approached the glide path entry point. One should remember that there's actually no instrumental glide path at Smoleńsku aerodrome. The controller timely reported to the crew that they reached the glide path entry point. It should be kept in mind that the glide path descent was conducted within cloud, without visual contact with ground references. Despite the controller's information, the crew continued flight at the circle altitude following the checklist. The navigator did not report the estimated vertical speed of glide path descent. The descent was initiated with a significant delay, which later required a significant increase in the vertical speed. On the glide path, the crew maintained the increased speed of around 300 km an hour instead of 265 km an hour, which made the aircraft more difficult to control. Here, and furthermore, the controller informed the crew about their position on the glide path, observing the aircraft blip within the actually depicted glide path deviation limits on the radar screen, which complies with the provisions of the aeronautical information publications of the Russian Federation and CIS countries applicable to the accident flight. The crew reported that the aircraft was in a landing configuration. The chief air traffic controller instructed them to stand by for landing. Depending on the situation, such as occupied runway or worsening weather conditions, the controller informs the crew about it and instructs them to stand by for landing. This means that the aircraft is not cleared for landing. In this case, if the crew, before reaching the minimum descent altitude, decides to land, it's their responsibility. The controller can clear them for landing, but this clearance would only mean that the airspace ahead and the runway are free. There were no reports from the crew before the minimum descent altitude of 100 meters and further. When passing the outer marker, the aircraft was 120 meters higher than the glide path established for Smoleńsku aerodrome, which led to increased vertical speed of descent and test firing of the Terrain Awareness and Warning System, Terrain Ahead Alert.
Terrain ahead.
At that moment, standard pressure of 760 mm mercury was set at the piloting command's main altimeter, which led to an accuracy of its indication of about 170 meters higher than the actual value. On the basis of the available data, it was not possible to clearly define who of the crew members did this and for what purpose. The other altimeters, including the other piloting command's altimeter, which was located nearby, retained the pressure of 745 mm mercury, which correlated to the aerodrome pressure. Comparing the indications of the pressure altimeters, radio altimeter and the navigator's call-outs of the flight altitude, it can be concluded that from the height of 300 meters, the call-outs were based on the radio altimeter readings, without taking into account the terrain, which violated the standard operating procedures and misinformed the crew. The navigator had solo flying experience on Tupolev 154s of 26 hours and a break-in flights of 2.5 months, within which period he flew as a co-pilot of a Yakolev 40 aircraft. As you can see now, the aircraft is descending with a vertical speed of over 8 meters a second, which is 2 times higher than the reference glide path descent speed. None of the crew members reported steep descent. This vertical speed was maintained until the obstacle avoidance maneuver was initiated.
Terrain ahead. Terrain ahead.
The aircraft reached the established minimum descent altitude of 100 meters. The analysis of the actual weather conditions revealed that it was impossible to establish visual contact with the runway lights or ground references. There were no reports from the crew, and the controller did not provide clearance for landing. The crew was to initiate the go-around, but they continued descent without clearance, with autopilot and autothrottle engaged. The navigator continued calling out the height every 10 meters until reaching 20 meters. The crew did not react to the recurrent firing of the terrain awareness and warning system pull-up alert. As you'll see further, the abrupt actions taken by the pilot in command at the very last moment could not be a result of a well-grounded decision to go around or a conscious reaction to high vertical speed of descent of about 8 meters a second, recurrent firing of the terrain awareness and warning system pull-up alerts, descending lower than the minimum descent altitude of 100 meters, firing of the radio altimeter decision height alert at 60 meters, information of the co-pilot go around, controller's instruction to terminate descent level 101. These facts confirm the attempt to change to visual flight before passing the middle marker in order to land visually. Further, in the video, the target flight path in case of timely go-around is shown by red aircraft.
Terrain ahead. Pull up, pull up, pull up, pull up. Terrain ahead. Terrain ahead. Pull up, pull up, pull up.
Very rough target.
Pull up.
Control высоты горизонт.
Special attention should be paid to the fact that the collision with obstacles was lower than the runway threshold elevation and before the defined fixed point, the middle marker, whose coordinates the crew had not even entered into the flight management system. Thus, this accident is a typical case of controlled flight into terrain, or CFIT, that happens every year throughout the world. To summarize it, we would like to emphasize that this video only presents the direct causes of the accident. The system causes and contributing factors are provided in the final report.